The dusty main street of Millbrook stretched before Margaret like a ribbon of forgotten dreams. Her black dress swept the wooden planks as she walked, the fabric heavy with grief and memories. 6 months had passed since Thomas died, leaving her alone in their big house on Elm Street. The silence there had become unbearable. Margaret paused outside Henderson's general store, watching families hurry past with their children in tow. She pressed her gloved hand to her chest, feeling the familiar ache that never quite went away. She and Thomas had always planned to have children, but time had slipped away from them like water through cupped hands. A weathered wooden sign caught her attention across the street. Millbrook Orphanage, it read in faded letters. Margaret had walked past it countless times, but today something pulled her forward. Her boots clicked against the wooden sidewalk as she crossed over. The orphanage stood like a tired old woman, its gray paint peeling and windows clouded with age. Margaret climbed the creaking steps and knocked on the heavy door. A stern-faced woman in a brown dress answered, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Mrs. Patterson," the woman said, recognizing her immediately. "I'm Mrs. Grimsby, the director. What brings you here today?" "I was wondering," Margaret began, her voice barely above a whisper, "about the children. Are there any who might need a home?" Mrs. Grimsby's expression shifted, becoming almost eager. "As a matter of fact, we have 3 boys who've been quite difficult to place. They single quotes unusual, but for the right price, I'm sure we could arrange something." Margaret felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "May I see them?" "Of course," Mrs. Grimsby replied, leading her inside. The hallway smelled of carbolic soap and something else Margaret couldn't identify. Desperate. Perhaps they walked through corridors lined with small sad-looking children who watched them pass with hollow eyes. Margaret's heart broke a little, more with each step. Finally, they reached a small room at the back of the building. "Boys," Mrs. Grimsby called sharply, "come out here." 3 small figures emerged from the shadows. Margaret gasped softly. Each child wore a rough burlap sack over his head, with crude holes cut out for eyes. Their clothes were patched and worn, their bare feet dirty from the wooden floors. "Why are they covered like that?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling. Mrs. Grimsby waved dismissively. "They're hideously disfigured, you see, scarred by a fire that killed their parents. The sacks keep other children from being frightened. They're good workers though, strong for their age." Margaret knelt down to the children's level. Through the rough holes in the burlap, she could see 3 pairs of eyes watching her, one blue, one brown, one green. Something stirred in her heart, a maternal instinct she'd thought lost forever. "How much?" she asked quietly. $5 each, Mrs. Grimsby replied without hesitation. 15 for all 3. They come with the clothes on their backs and nothing more. It was more money than Margaret had expected, but she found herself nodding. "I'll take them." The transaction was completed quickly, with papers signed and money exchanged. Mrs. Grimsby seemed eager to be rid of her charges, practically pushing the boys toward Margaret. "Come along," Margaret said gently to the 3 children. "We're going home." The walk through town was difficult. People stared and whispered, some crossing the street to avoid them. Margaret held her head high, one hand resting protectively on the shoulder of the smallest boy. She could feel his trembling through the thin fabric of his shirt. Her house on Elm Street had never seemed so welcoming. Margaret ushered the boys inside, closing the door firmly behind them. The afternoon light filtered through lace curtains, casting gentle patterns on the polished wooden floors. "You must be hungry," she said, leading them to the kitchen. "Let me fix you something to eat." As she prepared sandwiches and milk, Margaret glanced back at the 3 small figures huddled together at her kitchen table. They sat perfectly still, their covered heads turned toward each other as if communicating in a language only they understood. "What are your names?" she asked, setting plates before them. The tallest boy spoke first, his voice muffled by the burlap. "I'm Samuel. This is Benjamin, and the little one is Joseph." Margaret smiled. "Those are fine names. Strong names." She hesitated, then asked gently, "Would you like to remove those sacks? You're safe here. No one will hurt you." The boys exchanged glances through their rough masks. Samuel, who seemed to be the leader, shook his head slowly. "We can't, ma'am. We're too frightening to look at." Margaret's heart ached. She knelt beside Samuel's chair. "I don't believe that's true, but you don't have to do anything you're not ready for." Days passed into weeks. Margaret found herself growing attached to the 3 mysterious boys. They were polite and helpful, doing chores without being asked and never causing trouble. But they kept their distance, never removing their sacks, never fully trusting her kindness. Margaret began to notice things. The way they moved with perfect coordination, never bumping into furniture or each other. How they seemed to know things they shouldn't like when she was sad and needed comfort, or when the neighbor's cat was stuck in the old oak tree. One evening, as autumn painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson, Margaret sat in her parlor, mending clothes. The boys were upstairs, supposedly asleep, but she could hear their soft whispers through the floorboards. A gentle knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Samuel standing alone on the porch, still wearing his burlap mask. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "may I speak with you?" Margaret invited him into the parlor, her heart racing. In all their time together, none of the boys had ever approached her so formally. Samuel stood before her fireplace, his small hands clasped behind his back. "Mrs. Patterson, Benjamin, and Joseph and I, we've been talking. We need to tell you something." "What is it, dear?" Samuel's voice was barely audible. "We're not disfigured." Margaret set down her mending, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Grimsby told us that no one would want us if they saw our faces. She said we were cursed children, that our parents died because we brought bad luck. She made us wear these sacks so people wouldn't see the evil in our eyes." Tears began to flow down Margaret's cheeks. "Oh, Samuel, .. But you've been kind to us," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "You've never treated us like we were cursed. Benjamin thinks maybe you might not be afraid of us." "I could never be afraid of you children," Margaret whispered. Samuel reached up with trembling hands and began to untie the rough string that held his sack in place. The burlap fell away, revealing the face of a beautiful boy with sandy hair and bright blue eyes. His cheeks were rosy from the warm house, his expression a mixture of hope and fear. Margaret gasped, not from horror, but from joy. "You're absolutely beautiful, Samuel." Footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of Benjamin and Joseph, who had been listening from the shadows. Seeing Samuel's courage, they too removed their sacks. Benjamin had dark hair and warm brown eyes, while little Joseph was blond with green eyes that sparkled like emeralds. Margaret opened her arms, and all three boys rushed into her embrace. They clung to her as if she might disappear, their tears mixing with hers. "We love you, Mama Margaret," Joseph whispered, using the name they'd secretly called her in their whispered conversations. "And I love you," she replied, holding them close. "All of you, more than you'll ever know." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. But inside the house on Elm Street, a family had finally found each other. The lonely widow was lonely no more, and three frightened boys had discovered that sometimes love can see past any disguise. In the months that followed, the people of Millbrook would often see Margaret Patterson walking through town with her three handsome sons. The boys grew taller and stronger, their laughter filling the house that had been silent for too long. And if anyone asked about the strange beginning of their family, Margaret would simply smile and say that sometimes the most precious gifts come in the most unexpected packages. Love, she had learned, has a way of finding us exactly when we need it most.